You're listening to the Rogue Ones podcast, the Rogue Rabbit Trail series. Each time I talk to a guest, we sometimes find ourselves off topic. These smaller episodes feature audio that didn't make it to the final episode. This Rogue Rabbit Trail features cut audio from my conversation with author, playwright, and executive director of The Rabbit Room, A.S. Pete Peterson. If you haven't listened to that full episode, I encourage you to do so before you continue any further in this one, so you have a better context for the conversation. We did find ourselves on some interesting rabbit trails that took us further away from the topics at hand, but that were worth bringing into this shorter episode. We talked more in depth about his background, Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien's fireplace mantle, the one that he sat in front of while he wrote Lord of the Rings, and Pete's upcoming projects. We'll start with more information about his background in the Marines, what he didn't enjoy, and what stuck with him.
I'm not here to talk bad about the military because I'm very grateful and proud of my service. Mm-hmm. But there is a sense in which after 4 years, most of my friends who are like me got out and went on to college and to pursue their dreams. And I was stuck in for another 2 years. And so then I kind of had this realization that, you know, there is some sense, at least, in which the people who stay in the military long term, some of them are great, amazing people. Mm-hmm. Some of them are just there because it doesn't take much. You just kind of have to stick around, which meant that I felt like I was always going to be working for someone that I could outperform.
Sure.
And it wasn't going to matter.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right.
And again, like, this is not to say that that's how the whole military is. Like, there are amazing people in the military.
Right. Well, it's almost a sense of in any organization, the longer you stick around, for the most part.
Right.
There are people I know in jobs I had 5 years ago that are VPs of things suddenly. Right. And it's just because they stayed and everybody else left.
Yeah. So I feel like the military in some ways is a dramatic example of that. Mm-hmm. So I was anxious to get out and kind of like do my own thing and be recognized for what I was able to do.
Yeah.
And
that's what always blows my mind about things like Ernst & Young or these places where it's like you come in at a salary and maybe there's negotiating a salary, but then there are these levels. Yeah. And then you go up a thing and you're there for 5 years and that's really really weird to me.
Yeah.
Part of the hallmark of being a Marine, I've learned, is the regimented sort of like, keep my things pressed and I'm going to make my bed every morning. Did you keep any of that with you?
If my wife hears this, she will be laughing. Primarily, the Marine Corps made me sick of that kind of stuff. Okay. But what did stick is my need to have my clothes folded a very particular way.
Really?
And so she doesn't touch my laundry. Like, I fold mine very specifically, and they're in nice, neat little squares on the shelf.
Do you like that just because it looks...
It just seems wrong to me if it's not done that way.
Next, we'll talk more about Pete's development of his Fiddler's Gun novel series. Where did that
That's a great question. Like, I was thinking at the time a lot about the kind of stories that last, what makes them that way. And when I say that, I mean like Treasure Island and Dickens and The Count of Monte Cristo and like these stories that we feel like have been around forever and we all love them and will always be here for us. And so I think it was me trying to get into that mode, and you know, so it becomes the kind of period setting that's kind of romanticized, at least in my mind, and then the sense of adventure, coming of age novel. Mm-hmm. And then I really wanted it to be firmly based in American history, because so many of the things I love are based in British or European history. You know, myths and legends and knights and kings and all these kind of things are very non-American. And I kind of wanted there to be an American version of that sort of thing. And there are plenty of them, I've learned since. But yeah, it was kind of my...
Now that the Google is out there and the interwebs?
Or now that the Pete Peterson reads more widely. Yeah. But were you not reading widely then? I was, but like I said, you know, what I'm reading is, you know, Dostoevsky and, you know, Dante and all these other, like a bunch of like the classic, you know, most of which are not American, because America's only been around for 200 years, you know.
You wanted something that Wishbone could do on...
Wishbone?
Oh, you don't know Wishbone?
I don't know. What is that?
Oh, man. On PBS, this is for those of us who didn't have cable growing up, there was this little dog named Wishbone who would he would go between real life with his owner Joe. This is like a real life dog. This is real life people. And then he'd be like, this reminds me of the story of Huckleberry Finn. And then it'd be like, roo, and it goes to Wishbone in a little Huck Finn costume, running around in like a cemetery and they'd act out all of these like American classics on Wishbone.
Yeah,
so,
that's exactly what I want.
Yeah, no, I could. Okay, Lord of the Rings fans, these next bits are for you. We get on a bit of a rambling conversation as I had just started Fellowship of the Ring, and in his explanation of the word hutchmoot, he points out that intmoot is a thing, and, well, off we went.
Or ints.
Oh, or int. Oh.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings geeks will get that one.
Right, yes. I'm a couple chapters into, I've begun I've begun the journey.
Okay.
So I'm a few chapters into Fellowship of the Ring.
All right, well, stick with it because Fellowship is a hard book to read the first time.
You know what? I'm actually enjoying it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Just know that once you get past that book, it's like full speed ahead.
Oh, good. The Tom Bombadil thing.
What is going on with Tom Bombadil? Yes,
thank you. I'm glad. I don't know.
The more that I've read it and reread it, the more I've come to appreciate Tom Bombadil.
Okay.
But for years, I was like, what is this guy doing here?
Well, especially I adore the movies.
Yeah.
And so a large part of me, I was a little scared to read the books because I didn't want the movies to be ruined.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually been very helpful because I picture all of these characters doing the things. So it's been really nice. But still, Tom Bombadil, I can't. And but I do see why people, the purists, were upset with the movies because there's a little bit more whimsy in the books.
Yeah.
The movies are just pure,
dark.
dark, yes. And it's a little bit more whimsical in the books. And so I get that.
Yeah.
But I still see Elijah Wood
Which
as
also
Frodo.
means that in the books, there's more at risk, I think.
Explain.
Well, I mean, because of that whimsy and that lightness that is there so readily in the books, the darkness is that much more threatening because you recognize what's being threatened. Whereas in the books, I mean, you get the opening chapter in Hobbiton where everything is happy and, awesome. But then that's all gone for the most part. And so it's just oppressive, which is fine. I love the movies, but I just think...
even the 9-year period where Frodo gets the ring, Bilbo leaves, and then it's 9 years?
Right.
It's true. The movies suddenly go to this place of take it, go, run,
And to their credit, those movies it's an amazing adaptation. Now, having done adaptations of my own, like with Frankenstein, I have a real respect for how difficult it is to take something that's huge and sprawling and boil it down to its essence to get the same story across in a 90-minute or 2-hour time period. And I just went back and watched The Fellowship of the Ring recently, and I was just kind of mind blown by what a great adaptation it is. It's not perfect. It doesn't make all the choices that I would have made, but it takes an almost impossible task and makes something really great out of it, which is to be commended. Tolkien's Fireplace.
Tolkien's Fireplace won't be going at Northwind Manor.
Yeah.
But you do have that. You've recently procured that.
Yeah, we just got it 2 days ago. So we were able to acquire J.R.R. Tolkien's, the fireplace that was in J.R.R. Tolkien's bedroom, which was next to the desk where he wrote at least part of The Lord of the Rings. So when I say his fireplace, I mean it's like the facade, the mantle around the fireplace. It's like a tile kind of thing.
How did that happen?
Funny story. We were actually sitting in a staff meeting, and Andrew was like, "Hey, this is funny. I just saw on eBay that this guy's selling Tolkien's fireplace. It's like $45,000, so we should get that." And we were like, ha, 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 yeah, right. And Andrew was like, I'm just going to send him an email real quick and say, hey, if you would like to donate that instead to a nonprofit, and then it would have a little more meaning rather than just ending up in some rich guy's man cave, we'd like to talk. And so Andrew sent him the email, and 10 minutes later, he gets a response that just says, "Oh my gosh, I'm a huge Andrew Peterson fan. Let's talk."
You are kidding me.
No. So he ended up coming way down on the price that made it affordable for us. And that's how we ended up with the fireplace.
Wow, what a crazy experience for him.
Yeah. So the guy actually lived in St. Paul or something.
Okay.
And he had bought it from the folks who renovated Tolkien's house. So it's got a letter of provenance, so it went from those people to him, and he's had it, and then he's given it to us.
Oh my gosh.
So it's pretty
amazing.
Cool. Yeah. And it's also funny, it's not this, when you say Tolkien's fireplace, I think everybody has in their head this epic, like giant fireplace that like Vikings would dance around or something.
Carved out of oak.
Right? So, and that's what I had in my mind too. And then when we got it, like this is a bedroom fireplace. So, it's not a huge imposing thing. It's still beautiful. And I think it's perfect for where we're going to use it. We're putting it in the library at Northwind Manor. But it's funny, when we opened it up, somebody said, I'm getting like a real kind of like Spinal Tap Stonehenge vibe right now.
Stonehenge! As it comes down. And
it's
then
in
the
danger of being
people
trod upon by dwarves.
Oh my God.
So it's not that small. It's not that small, but
No.
it's definitely is not this big epic thing that I think a lot of people expect.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a great artifact.
Next, we talk more about how Pete got his pen name. Which, on the topic of pen names, I mean, I love like the C.S. Lewis thing. And was that a...
My name is Arthur Sherman Peterson.
Which is a killer name.
No. Well, yeah, okay.
Arthur's
Thank
a
you.
great... Arthur
you.
Peterson is a great name.
It's a great name. However, it is my father's name.
Oh.
So my dad was Art Peterson growing up.
Okay.
And so nobody was going to call me Art or Arthur. And so that meant that growing up, my name was Sherman.
Yeah.
And like you can imagine how that goes over in middle school. Like, it's just not ideal, right?
No. Oh, no.
But it was my name, whatever. Wasn't happy with it. But when I joined the Marine Corps, everybody in the Marine Corps goes by their last name, and Peterson really quickly became Pete.
Okay.
So for 6 years, everybody called me Pete. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, that just stuck. Because I was living with my old Marine Corps buddies, and so ever since then, since I was 19 years old, everybody in my life, except for my family, has called me Pete.
Okay.
And so that's just my name. But then when it came time to publish a book, it was like, oh, what goes on this? Is it going to be Arthur Peterson, Sherman Peterson, Pete Peterson? I didn't feel like any of those fit. Pete Peterson just sounded silly. And so I was just like, I'm just going to take a cue from my literary heroes like T.S. Eliot and C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien and just go with A.S. Peterson.
Right.
However, the unforeseen consequence of that was that a lot of people confuse my books with my brother's.
Oh, yeah, that would...
So Andrew Peters, they read the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson, and then they see, right next to those on the book table at an event or in the Rabbit Room store, they see The Fiddler's Gun by A.S. Peterson. They assume it's the same person, and they take it home and they read it to their 8-year-old, and then they send me angry emails.
Uh-oh, no.
Because my books are not for kids.
Uh-oh.
Like I did not write them for children. They are very much not children's books.
No.
They're about war.
Sure.
They have really hard situations in them. They have some realistic language in them. And it happens all the time where people get to a certain point of the, and I know what point they're talking about. They get to a certain point of the book and they're like, we're reading this out loud to our children, and we realize, ooh, maybe I should read ahead. I'm like, yes, you should.
Why would you not?
I know, it's this really weird assumption that people make because Andrew and I are brothers. They just, even when they know sometimes, they assume that we're writing for the exact same audience. And I'm just not. I have nothing against children's literature. It's just not who I'm writing for.
Right.
One of the things that's funny about it is having, my family calls me Sherman.
Okay. Sherman.
Sherman, or Sherm even.
Sherm. Well, that's even better.
Yeah, keep laughing. So they call me Sherman, and then people who don't know me at all call me Arthur. Right? So if a bill collector calls, is Arthur there?
No.
And then if somebody calls me on the phone and says, is Pete there? Like, I know it's somebody I actually want to talk to.
Yeah, you can kind of suss out who it is that you're talking to.
So it's interesting. But what else is interesting about it is my parents refuse to call me Pete. They just can't get it through their heads. It's just, they always call me Sherman. And it's weird. They get on Facebook and call me Sherman.
Do they really?
What are you doing?
Oh no, not on the Facebook.
But the funny thing is that I realized the other day that I've been Pete longer than I was ever Sherman.
Just like in terms of how long you've been on this
earth?
earth?
I was Sherman for 19 years of my life. But I'm 47 now, which means there is much more of me that's Pete. And so I kind of want to tell my mom and dad sometime, I'm like, get with the program. Like, who are you talking about?
Sherman is no more. Only Pete now.
Yeah.
And finally, Pete shares a hysterical story of his first foray into playwriting. And then I tell him about the brilliant idea I have for an A.S./Andrew Peterson musical to be performed at a future Hutchmoot. Unfortunately, he wasn't into it at all. Then we talk about what's next for his theatrical work.
And then I immediately, actually, this is a funny story. So the director, he asked me to write this thing. He was like, hey, would you write the book for Cinderella? Now, in musical terms, that means write the script, right?
Right.
But I didn't know that. And he's sitting here having this conversation. Would you write the book for this play? And I'm like, oh yeah, I could write my own like novel of Cinderella. No. And I'm thinking through it all. And it was like the conversation was almost over before I was like, wait a minute, do you mean a script? And he was like, yeah, that's what it's called.
Are we putting on a play here?
Yeah. I literally that's how little I knew about the industry or that art form.
Yeah.
Had no idea. And then, to the same point, when I wrote the book, I wrote lyrics, which you don't do unless you're Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Sure.
I can't compose music. I can't sing. I can't play music. I was just like, it'd be really cool if somebody said this,
Yeah. You know what? Actually, in a future Hutchmoot, years from now, an A.S. Peterson original play with an Andrew Peterson lyric and music would be very interesting. On that Friday night of Hutchmoot,
that would never happen.
You could hold auditions the Hutchmoot before for this original production.
Yeah.
So what is next for you? You've talked about the Corrie ten Boom play.
Yeah, that's this year. I'm flying to Houston here in a couple of weeks to do the first table read, which I'm super excited about. I'm also really nervous about it. It's a book like my other two plays. The Battle of Franklin was an original story. Like it was based on historical fact, but nobody had ever told the story dramatically before. So I kind of had free reign to do whatever I wanted. And then with Frankenstein, it's 200 years old. It's been adapted a million times. It doesn't matter what you change. You can kind of give your own spin to the story. But with Corrie ten Boom, it was published in the 70s, and it is beloved all over the world. And people know the book backward and forward. They've been raised with the book. They know exactly what they want when they come to see this play. And that's terrifying to me because I can't include everything, and it is going to be my own spin on it because, I'm a different storyteller than Corrie ten Boom was. And my method of telling her story is going to be different than her method of telling her own story. And it's theater too, which is a different medium. It's not the same as a novel or a movie. So anyway, I'm a little apprehensive, but I think it's all going to be fine.
What was your research process like for that?
Well, we went to Amsterdam. She lived in Haarlem, which is just outside of Amsterdam. So we spent about a week there, visited her house, stayed in the town, and kind of got to know, the culture over there. And then we drove from Amsterdam all the way across Germany to visit Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she and her sister were held. Wow. And that was like one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was not prepared for the experience of visiting a concentration camp. I've told people it's kind of like going to the Grand Canyon. You know how have you been to the Grand Canyon?
I have not. I've been to a concentration camp, but I haven't been to a Grand Canyon.
So what typically happens with the Grand Canyon is you've seen pictures of it all your life. And you're like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. It's just this big canyon. But then when you go and walk up to the rim, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so much bigger than I thought it was. And that's how going to a concentration camp is. I've seen all the movies and all this, but when we walked in and you really got to take in the enormity of the evil that happened there, it's just, your brain can't even comprehend it.
There's a very real thing about being in a place. Yeah. Even if it was decades and decades ago, you're in a place.
Yeah.
And there's a eerie reverence. I was 10 when I went to a concentration camp.
Where did you go?
I really need to ask my grandma because it was it might have been Dachau.
And that's where we went there too.
Okay. So did it have a big sculpture?
Yeah.
Yes, that was the one.
Like barbed wire,
yes,
kind of? Yeah, that's Dachau.
Okay, yeah.
So we went to Ravensbrück one day, which is where Corrie ten Boom was, and stood in front of the oven where her sister was burned, and just this incredible experience for me in the context of researching the story.
And because you've been in there. You've had to kind of experience their realities.
Yeah, it was powerful. And then, so that's up in North Germany, and then we took the 6-hour drive. The next day, we drove all the way down to Dachau. And on the drive, my wife read out loud Elie Wiesel's Night, which is the bleakest book I've ever read. It's an incredible book. And it's the kind of shocking book where like you're hearing the things that you're being told, and you're like, can that really be true?
Yeah.
Like, can it have really been that awful? And then we get to Dachau, and we walk in and we see the pictures of what we had just read about. And you're like, oh my gosh, it really is that awful. And so it was 3 days of just bleak depression.
You did those back to back?
Back to back, yeah.
Oh my.
And so like when we got, like after about 3 hours at Dachau, we just walked back to the car and sat there and cried.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really, really powerful. And I'm glad I did it because it really has shaped the play in a way that it wouldn't have been otherwise. But yeah, that's... yeah, it's interesting. I've also told my wife, like now, like my first play was about the Civil War, and it's about the bloodiest battle in the Civil War, and it's just everybody dies at the end, and it's, just tears and grief and despair, and it's about the horribleness of humans and the way they treat one another. And then I wrote Frankenstein, which is about suffering and the nature of evil and the abject depravity of man. And now I'm writing about the Holocaust.
Oh,
and I'm like, okay, the next play I write has got to be a comedy.
I think you bring Cinderella back and you just...
I know, right? I mean, I've got to write a comedy. Otherwise, I'm typecast as like that guy.
Yeah. But if you do it well, I mean, maybe for your sanity and mental health, perhaps, maybe not living in that. If you haven't listened to the full episode with Pete Peterson, you should do it now. You can find all episodes, past and present, at rogueonespodcast.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon.